speed. The roots of the word speed can be traced back to the Proto-Germanic word describing prospering, succeeding, being happy. In the world of Trackmania, few people embody the ideas of success and that feeling of joy conveyed in the ancestral lineage of the word speed better than those who call themselves full-speed drivers. To begin to get a proper appreciation of the world of Trackmania Full Speed, let's start at the beginning. My beginning. Now, apparently I'd been living under a rock because despite the series being nearly 2 decades old, I hadn't heard about it until a year ago. I started playing for the first time in April of 2022, beginning with the spring campaign. I tried my best to absorb as many of the basic mechanics as possible, to figure out as much as I could without guides or tutorials. In my first 3 days, I played 30 hours of Trackmania. I was hooked. Something tells me that's not the optimal line. It quickly became obvious that it was unlike any other racing game that I had ever played. The fast and short nature of most of the tracks, the built-in feedback that the game gives you in real time about your progress, how your current performance compares to your best, the speed and ease of resetting a run if you make a mistake, not to mention all of the community-made plugins that take all of that feedback and analysis and turn it up to 11. All of these things allow you to get an idea for what your theoretical best run might look like, what you are realistically capable of. All of these elements practically force you to constantly be chiseling that muscle memory into your head, pushing you to optimize every line, every turn, every slide, and every failed attempt a reminder of what not to do, while every successful one gets you that much closer to your personal version of perfection. That's actually a huge part of what makes this game so great. Like every other competitive pursuit, there's a handful of people in the world that you can call the best. And yet, Trackmania is one of the few games I've ever played where the deepest, most fulfilling competition is with yourself. To be able to see where you are and know exactly what it will take to get to where you want to be, setting a goal that, oddly enough, can feel both impossible and inevitable is a daunting task and the beginning of an exciting journey. I cannot overstate how satisfying it is to improve in this game. I rarely get new personal best times, even when I find myself getting lost, spending dozens of hours trying to cut a few thousandths of a second off my time. It's everything I loved about speedrunning condensed into a tiny, efficient, and heart-pumping package. I've definitely been bitten by the bug and gotten a taste for the allure of what people in this community refer to as hunting.
We're just trying to we're either trying to beat a specific person, like a rival or something. We're trying to beat a time. We're trying to get a medal. Playing Trackmania I will always consider a form of a speedrun, but a hunt is just like another word for a grind. You know, a grind for a specific goal. So yeah, it's just whatever your goal is, or whether you just want to see how far you can push yourself on the particular track or a set of tracks. No, it's just about you have a goal and you're going after it. It's not just this game, like this it's just speed running in general that does that. Like, you don't have to be the best. You just have to constantly improve on yourself. That's the whole idea. I think that's a really beautiful thing, and that's why I will always cherish speedrunning as a whole.
I used it at the very beginning, like kinda as an escape. I didn't have to interact with someone. It was literally me against myself. I don't know. I kind of liked it. Like, once you become somewhat good at a game, it's even more fun. It is so good. It can be very frustrating, but it's also like probably the most enjoyable thing in a game for me. If I'm not good at a style, I might as well improve during the process.
For me, hunting means you're in the process of grinding one specific track in order to maximize your personal best time. Now, these sessions, of course, can last for hours, as you may know by now. So, for me, like, the only recommendation I have to other people is better be sure to hunt maps you actually enjoy. But the thing what I like about hunting is it's not repetitive, because it's the essence of the game, if you ask me, you know? Getting the best out of yourself on each map you drive. Yeah, hunting in the same time is training as well, because the more you'll drive a map, the more you'll start to understand it and its tricks. And you can use those learnings on other maps as well.
How that goal compares to others, where it might sit on the global leaderboard, how it might compare to your friends' best times, whether it's the world record or not, none of those comparisons actually matter. None diminish the excitement and the feeling of accomplishment when you demolish a truly challenging personal goal. Maybe you do want to set that world record. Maybe you just want to be in the top 10,000. Maybe you want to finish your favorite track in under 35 seconds. Anyone who's ever watched someone set one of these goals and grind a track, piece by piece, bit by bit, chipping away at that personal best time, learning countless new things, making 1,000 shitty mistakes, all for that one moment where everything comes together. Who knows, it could be your next attempt. Why not one more? I was gonna go to bed after I beat that author medal, but now here I am. It's a blessing and a curse that in Trackmania, both your failures and your successes are your own. It's one of the most skill-based games I've ever played. I guess there's a few exceptions to that. Whoa! Whoa! Goddamn, chat! For the first couple of weeks, I spent my time grinding the Spring 2022 campaign. Now, one of the tracks that gave me the hardest time was number 19. What the f***? My introduction to an entirely new kind of track, something I had never driven before and honestly didn't quite understand. Full speed. I mean, do you just hold the gas the entire time, right? Like seriously, there's no braking, like no letting off? Or like sometimes there is. Seems easy, dude. I don't know why everybody thinks this is hard.
The objective is to build up as much momentum as you possibly can and just snowball it through an entire track. To me, a track only remains full speed. You can drive the entire track without braking, without drifting, and without crashing, without letting go of the accelerator. If you can drive the entire track as it's intended, and by doing all those things, that to me counts as full speed, because that's exactly what you're doing. You're trying to build and maintain full speed. And yeah, it was just really fun to learn how to just snowball your speed even more.
In my eyes, it is a very unique style in this game. I mean, you have different styles, mixed style. You have tech, you have RPG, you have ice, you have different styles. All of them have some unique sides of it, but to be honest, in my eyes, full speed is one of the most unique ones. Okay, you have techniques, you have tricks, you have combinations of blocks they use in mapping you never see in other styles. And I don't know, like those aspects just made me go into full speed, and that's the thing I just like about it. Yeah.
It's mostly the art of not losing speed. Do everything so your car keeps accelerating and it keeps getting faster and doesn't lose speed. I've been playing full speed like on and off since I was 7 years old. And like when I was a kid, it's of course that I've fallen in love with the insanely fast, insanely like high octane gameplay of full speed. Just spoke to me for some reason. For the longest time, I didn't know much about it. I just played, like I would join the server and then never asked any questions, and was like really bad for like 10 years straight. Just played when I wanted to, and like as soon as I really got like into it and asked myself how to get better at it and started like looking around, that's when like I knew, okay, I want to get really good at this. And that's when I started spending more and more time, because I noticed how deep it got, the mechanics and the skill ceiling of it. And the learning curve of it is also a big factor. Like it's super hard to get into it, but once you make like the first step up, once you know how to like do the first SDs, how like you get speed from any kind of feature in the map, and you start to just crush your old records, that's when I like really fell in love with it.
One of the initial goals I set for myself for the first few weeks of playing was to achieve the author medal on all 25 tracks of this season's campaign. Now, as you progress through the tracks, which cover many styles like ice tracks, technical tracks, full dirt tracks, and other tracks that mix these different styles together, both the tracks as well as their medals get progressively more difficult. Now, as of the making of this video, I've achieved all author medals with the exception of track 24. The goddamn bane of my existence. Track 19 was the first full-speed track that I had ever encountered, with a gold medal time of just under 1 minute. It would take me nearly an hour to just finish the map all the way through, and even then it required me to respawn at many of the checkpoints multiple times. After an hour of playing the track that should have taken me a minute to finish, I got my first completion with only a few resets, just over 2 minutes. Now, because I had admittedly skipped a few prior tracks in the campaign and am quite inexperienced, this new style and escalated difficulty and complexity proved to be quite the challenge. The way that this track was designed, having huge loops, wall rides, slippery half-pipes, it required, well, full speed to be able to properly navigate. If you make a mistake like taking the wrong entry into a curve, or bump into a wall losing you significant speed, the next obstacles of the track that you're going to encounter are quite possibly impossible to navigate. Now, once I got comfortable with some of the beginner lines through the track and eventually got the gold medal, the final challenge was hunting the author medal of under 54 seconds. Now, what stuck with me in the intervening time, the thing that truly blew my mind, was the actual difference between my best run and the world record run. I'd quickly come to realize that in order to truly grasp what it takes to drive at the highest levels, What separates a pro with a 49-second time and an amateur with a 53-second time on the same track, you need to understand some of the intricacies of the game, its physics, and many of its unique mechanics. I simply couldn't understand how that much time could be saved on a map where all you did was hold the accelerator down and steer. What was I missing? How is it that when we have identical cars in terms of performance and we're taking at least what seems to me to be similar lines through the track, I could still be missing something? Well, the first piece of the puzzle that required me to properly answer this question was, of course, speed. Now, in Trackmania, there are far more ways that speed can be increased and preserved than I had remotely considered when learning to drive. It's one thing to know that we want to increase and preserve speed in a racing game, but it's something else entirely to know how. And there are far more ways to maximize speed in this game that I had remotely considered when I was first learning. In Trackmania, you only accelerate while your car's on the ground. Whenever your car has no tires touching the road surface, it's going to stop accelerating. So naturally, in most cases, we want to minimize any and all time spent in the air. Now, there's a number of different ways to achieve this. When your car is airborne, holding the accelerator down will maximize your forward momentum, allowing you to fall slower and travel further than if you release it mid-air. As you would expect, your car's rotation when in the air depends on multiple factors, such as your speed, the shape and material of the road surface, or obstacles that you're jumping from or impacting. Unfortunately for us, we have quite a bit of control over that as well. Not only are we able to control the left and right motion of the car using the steering wheel, but by tapping the brakes, you'll halt your front-to-back rotation, a technique commonly known as air braking. This is most often used to control the angle of your landing, orienting your car so it lands as parallel as possible with the surface that you're landing on, reducing the chance that you'll bounce into the air, losing control of the car, ultimately losing more speed. When watching more skilled drivers navigating more complicated sections of the track, it can very often look like that driver is taking a very weird line, something that a reasonable onlooker might conclude would cause them to lose speed, although very often the opposite is true. If you're new to Trackmania and have spent any time playing more arcade-like racing games, you might approach a simple downhill section like this. Now, as mentioned before, you might see more experienced drivers take a bit of a different line. Now, while it's safe to assume that a more controlled, simpler approach would be faster, it becomes obvious that that's not necessarily the case when you compare the two techniques side by side. Once you understand these concepts and pay close attention to what many more experienced drivers are doing, you'll begin to notice all sorts of other ways in which speed losses caused by unavoidable airtime and subsequent landings can be minimized. When I first started playing this particular track, called Purple, the first few moments of the run felt pretty bad, and at first I admit I attributed that to weird track design. At first I hadn't considered the reduction of airtime that would be caused by jumping to the right side of the landing, largely because I didn't feel confident that I could land it reliably without hitting the walls on the right, which would be undoubtedly slower than any airtime penalty I'd get from landing in the middle or on the left side. Now, with some practice, I was able to get this approach more consistent, but once again I found myself falling behind the better drivers very quickly after the first jump. Now, as with most complex skills, paying close attention to the little things that more skilled people do can pay dividends in your own progression. As we know, the alignment and distance of the jump can be controlled with the angle that the car takes off the end of the track, but we can actually do one better. With some precision and timing, we can control the horizontal rotation of the car by allowing one of the front wheels to leave the ground slightly before the other. This is a clever solution to the airtime problem, as it forces one of the tires to land sooner than it otherwise would if we jumped with the car parallel to the ground. Let's take a look and compare all three methods of approaching the beginning of this track. While many mechanics in Trackmania are not quite one-to-one with real-world physics, we can definitely benefit from understanding arguably the most fundamental aspect of racing, the racing line. Knowing when to initiate a turn, what speed and angle you want to enter with, when to brake, when to accelerate again when we exit the turn, and at what angle, can all have a huge impact on maximizing speed while cornering. For the same sort of reasons that we want to avoid airtime, it's very important to maximize traction at all times. Cars tend to accelerate optimally in a straight line, so while cornering, we want to minimize the momentum of the car in any direction that differs from the way that we want to go. If we don't, the car may begin to slide, indicated by the skid marks left on the ground, ultimately reducing the car's ability to accelerate. Let's compare a couple ways that we could approach this simple turn. The first is to take a more aggressive, tighter line into and out of the corner, trying to stay as close to the wall as possible, which might look and feel pretty fast. Now, alternatively, we can enter the turn with a smoother, less aggressive angle, and by carefully controlling our steering just before we begin to accelerate on the downhill at the end of the turn, by straightening the wheels briefly, we reduce the sideways momentum, preventing the car from sliding. All of this together maximizes the acceleration through the entire turn, and despite the fact that we had a wider line, we end up with more exit speed as a result. And as the pros discussed earlier, in full speed racing, those extra few kilometers per hour early in a run are going to snowball, leading to significantly more speed for the entirety of the run. There are even more aspects to maximizing speed in Trackmania, but I'll leave that for future videos that I want to make discussing some of the other disciplines like tech, ice driving, and many others. However, there's one more mechanic that I need to discuss when talking about full speed. Earlier, I mentioned how sliding your car will lose you speed, but I wasn't quite telling you the full story. In Trackmania, not all slides are created equal. There's a mechanic in the game that's almost entirely invisible to new players watching Trackmania full speed driving, while at the same time being the very mechanic that separates those who are good and those who are great: speed drifting.
Speed drifting is just abusing a game mechanic where you get a speed reward, I guess you could call it. I wouldn't call it a speed boost, but rather a speed reward or acceleration reward for ending a slide. Since you're constantly not ending the slide, you are getting a constant speed reward, whatever you want to call it. And the funny thing about speed drifting is the faster you're going, the more effective it is. So it's just one of those things. That's what I mean about the momentum just snowballing. The faster you go, the more effective your speed drifts are. It just gets ridiculous. And another fun fact about 800 speed, you can only accelerate by speed drifting. If you can try this yourself, when you drive a normal road at 800 speed, you'll notice that there's a soft limit where you'll just suddenly accelerate extremely slowly at 800 speed. Whereas when you're speed drifting, it's significantly faster. So learning how to control speed drifts at 800 speed will give you a massive advantage in those ultra speed maps. The best advice I can give when it comes to speed drifting: first thing, learn to trigger the slides. Second thing, learn to hold the slides as long as you can, where possible. And then the third thing, learn to overlap them at roughly 50%. And then you just build from that.
So you have to know speed drifting starts around 420 plus speed, unless you have grass or dirt where you can start with 200, but this is going a bit too wide. Let's say you have a normal surface, you start with 420 plus, right? And the less speed you have in a speed drift, the less you will gain out of the speed drift. So let's say you are speed drifting for a second at 450 speed. You will maybe gain 5 speed more than the usual acceleration of the game. But if you speed drift at 750 speed for a second, you will gain maybe 20 speed, which is way more than you would have gained out of a slow speed drift, right? So first of all, try to speed drift in high speeds as good as possible. But speed drifting is the technique which makes full speed such a unique thing, actually. And it changes the whole freaking game. Like, if full speed wouldn't have that mechanic, it would only be steering left or right, not releasing, maybe once doing an air brake, right, before you land in a jump, and that's it. And to be honest, that would be boring.
And it's like the main thing. People always say from other styles, they always say speed drifts are way too important in full speed. It's all about SDs nowadays. It's getting kind of boring and stuff like that, and I don't get that much because speed drifting is technically like drifting in tech. It's the main thing. You need to know how to do it to play the style. It's like you on modern full speed maps, you connect every single feature. So features are wall rides, loops, and tubes and whatnot. It's mostly feature, then SD, or two SDs, then feature, then SD, and stuff like that. It's the connector of it all. And like what made me fall in love with speed drifting, like it's my by far the best, like my favorite thing to do in the game. It's like not perfectible. No human gets close to really perfecting SDs. It's the amount you can get out of them is ridiculous. Like there's nothing better for me to get out of a wall ride, start the perfect SD and hold it perfectly to the very end you can, and then just seeing the huge speed difference. If people from our stream will know that when I get like a word record on a speed drift heavy map, I sometimes go into the editor and just look at like the most perfect speed drift I did in that run, and I will just rewind it like 20, 30 times, and just, I don't know, it's just so satisfying to me.
In order for new full-speed drivers to begin developing and improving their speed drifting skills, it's quite important to understand all of the different ways in which speed drifts can be initiated.
Jumping in a slight angle, that's like when you have one of those small black ramps in a lot of full speed maps. Just if you jump straight, you won't get a slide. If you jump a slight angle, it's one of the most used. Going over 600 kilometers in full steering. Going over any kind of elevation change, so when you go from sloped, from flat to sloped, or like upwards or downwards, or elevation change will also mean like out of a loop, the exits you can do. Even small bumps will let you initiate a slide if you have a certain speed. And change of surface or other grip manipulation. So going like off a magnet sometimes will give you a slide. Going over grass and then onto platform again, or losing a reactor boost down, for example, will also give you a slide.
As for these, are there actually to trigger a speed drift on a position where you maybe fucked up to get the auto drift, or where you maybe have a magnet or reactor boost, and this gives you so much grip that the auto drift doesn't come? Then you will go for S4D. But because you lose a tiny bit of speed tapping the brake button, you want to speed drift for a specific time in order to get more speed out of the speed you have lost by tapping the brake, right? So be careful with S4Ds. If you do an S4D for half a second at, 420 speed, of course you won't be faster because you lost more speed than you have gain out of it. But if you do an S4D at 750 speed for half a second, you will maybe gain a bit more speed than you have lost by tap of the brake. You have to know these kind of rules in that mechanic. I don't know if you're aware of it, but you can only speed drift horizontally. As soon as you're vertical, you can't speed drift anymore unless you have magnets and reactor boost, right? Which gives you enough of grip to actually do that. But now, let's say you have a competition map and you are in a very complicated section and the drift just didn't trigger in the right moment. Then you, of course, want to S4D, even though it's the worst option. But still, I have a huge respect for you that you are actually then going for this free, because I mean, actually it's 4-head, right? Maybe even 5-head, because we still have a lot of people in the full speed community which says, how does S4D even work? I can't trigger it because as soon as I trigger it, I'm over drifting all the time because I don't know how to actually tap or place my thumb on the stick when I pressed the brake button. So if you as a beginner starts to already get familiar with S4D, that's going to be a huge plus for you later.
Now, if you're playing Trackmania on a controller, you have a couple different options for how you're going to be maintaining your speed drifts. Tapping versus holding. If you're using a keyboard, then you're going to want to plan on tapping.
Like, I've learned the speed drift on keyboards, and actually I did tapping. When I swapped to controller, I tried holding SDs. And from doing both, and then now I do controller tapping, I'd say it's personal preference, but I think tapping is much easier on the hands and wrists than holding. Because when you hold, especially when you reach a higher level, like, you really stiffen up your hand and arm into a very uncomfortable position just to hold those speed slides, and it ended up getting a lot more pain in my hands, like just from holding it in that unnatural position. Whereas with tapping, it's more like my hand's constantly moving, so it's in a comfortable position. But it's also a lot easier to trigger slides when doing a tapping rhythm as opposed to holding.
I wanted to briefly mention that this channel is a brand new channel separate from my main YouTube channel. A place where I want to make the best content about whatever it is that I'm passionate about, inspired by all of my favorite content without needing to worry about the algorithm. If you want to help me grow this channel so I can make more content like this, please consider subscribing. And if you think anybody else, both inside or outside the Trackmania community, would enjoy it, it'd be fantastic if you shared it. Okay, let's get back to the show. As soon as I was introduced to speed drifting and could witness firsthand the knife edge you have to balance on to incorporate it into your driving, the addictive dance that adds so much to the already fantastic driving experience this game provides, it became clear just how incredibly high this game's skill ceiling is. Seeing both my ignorance of as well as my struggles with many aspects of the game's mechanics, a couple of the veterans in the Trackmania community, who coincidentally enough happened to be names that I would see on the leaderboards of a number of tracks that I was playing, pointed me towards a few different clubs, containing a number of campaigns that were aimed at learning full speed. And it was here, as well as a few other clubs, that I'd be spending the next few days, forcing myself to learn as much as I could about some of these new mechanics. This is 500 Speed SD, a map designed to challenge drivers to initiate a speed slide at around 500 kilometers an hour, requiring them to maintain a clean and consistent speed slide until they come to either of two massive vertical walls. Commonly referred to as a speed check, the finish line is unreachable unless a minimum speed is obtained prior to the jump. I won't bore you with the details, I'd rather show you a tiny fraction of what I experienced while attempting to reach this track's finish line one single time over the course of multiple days. On countless attempts, I had hit the requisite speed to overcome the speed check, understood to have been just over 600 kilometers per hour. I had some of the smoothest speed slides I had ever had, as close to perfect as I thought I could achieve. As was becoming quite the pattern, I was clearly missing something.
Most of the new people which are starting full speed thinks if I can speed drift, I can drive full speed. Like, it's all about speed drifting. Oh, this guy's better than me because he knows how to speed drift. It's a yes and no, because basically speed drifting is not the mechanic which gives you most of the speed. I'd say the vertical positions are the most important ones, because in the vertical positions, if you fuck up the line, you're going to lose a ton of speed. And if you do it correctly, you're going to save a ton of speed, right? But speed drifting gives you just the opportunity to build up more speed than the usual acceleration of the game.
I always like to emphasize this, for the love of God, stop worrying about SDs if you're at the beginning. If you're new to full speed, don't worry about speed drifts. Just learn to drive the maps as smooth as possible. Focus on all the transitions in the map, all the wall rides, all the tubes. Pay attention to your momentum as many places as possible. Get into the habit of doing that, and then you can start implementing speed slides once you get comfortable driving FS maps. So yeah, don't try to do everything all at once. Just add one thing at a time and just build from there. And not just, thinking about the things you did wrong, but also giving yourself credit where it's due. It's oh, that was pretty good. I want to see more of that. Positive reinforcement helps as well. That's all you need to do.
During this process, I learned countless lessons from some of the best in the world. So many things that I'd otherwise be ignorant of for a considerable amount of time. And once I learned the significance of speed drifting, I admit that I was taken in by the flashiness of it. It's easy to see which SDs are good and which are bad, but what makes the best is all of the rest of the minutiae that only the best will notice. The little details, the lines, transitions, the smoothness of every moment of a fantastic run. The little details, the lines, transitions, the smoothness of every moment of a fantastic run that will lead to some of the most incredible experiences, both for the drivers and for those of us watching them with our jaws on the floor. This endeavor has given me another level of appreciation for full-speed drivers, but it also brought to my attention so many other aspects of this discipline and the community surrounding it. It's easy to forget that all of this would be impossible without the tracks that these guys and girls are shredding along the way, almost all of which, amazingly, are community-generated. The beauty of the concepts and designs done by the track makers and the people that create and design the scenery that surrounds them, breathing life into every corner of the track, is quite literally art. The thoughtfulness, skill, attention to detail that goes into every section of road, booster, magnet, the placement, angle, size, and alignment of every transition, each loop and ramp. The track makers are arguably the heart at the center of full speed, pumping life into the community, helping push the skills of those that challenge themselves to drive them to another level entirely. It's also easy to miss that there's another subsection of this community with a large and impressive history, one that deserves a video all of its own: competitive full speed. Now, before we end, I feel it's necessary to talk a little bit about these aspects of the community.
There are plenty of sick full speed maps, and usually I don't have a personal preference or favorite, let's say, but if I have to pick one, at the moment I'd go with Mondscheinprinzessin by Sterzo. But that's the map I really enjoy the most to drive. Like, scenery is pretty simple, it's vanilla scenery, nothing special, but the route is so flowy, and at that moment when the map came out, it was also very creative. We have seen new stuff in this track, and it was just beautiful to drive. And it's also challenging, it's hard, and I have the third best time on it, actually. Like, mapping full speed is one of the hardest discipline in mapping in this game, because you need to have the skills in order to calculate sections correctly. Because if you are, let's say, a less experienced full speed drivers, you won't hit the maximum speed pros are heading at the section. Then you build a map for a specific speed you reach, but not for the fastest speed, which is possible, and then it's getting really quickly under-calculated, right? Or miscalculated, and that's the hard fact about full speed mapping.
There's so many good maps. It's crazy. Like, it's a really big thing for me that maps are calculated, so that even the faster players don't slide out of the turn or fall out of the map when they're too fast. That's like makes it super unsatisfying. Which is also a reason why full speed is pretty hard to map, because you have to be a somewhat decent player to build one. It's a really big thing for me that maps are intuitive. Like, if you go out of a loop, I always have a intuition where my car wants to go after, where I want to steer. And so if that is always right on the map, that's a big plus. And yeah, creativity, like new twisters or like new blocks that use are in a different way, in a different angle, nice transitions, stuff like that. That's just the best thing. I love those kind of maps. I'm a full SD addict, and that just fills all my needs. Like most older entry-lag maps, I'm just a huge entry-lag fanboy, and he knows that.
Because in full speed there are still some sub-styles, more or less. What you are seeing in Track of the Day, those types of maps are pretty flat, and they are pretty wide and open. Platforms are pretty big, you can have many lines. Like, there are those beginner maps, which are basic. They have 3 to 5 wall rides, features like loops, turnovers and stuff. And then flat, or mostly flat, road that's connecting the features. But there are also roller coaster style maps. For example, DC's Speed Park. You see DC Speed Park and DC Speed Park 2. So those two maps are considered roller coaster maps because there are a lot of features, like only a few longer SDs, but it's always wall rides into a turnover, into a tube, into a loop, into a wall ride again, and it's all mixed and you're just flying all over the map. Like, this is the prime example of a roller coaster map that is pretty difficult to one-shot, I would say, especially Speed Park 2. It's a 2-minute map, it's pretty hard, but it's a lot of fun if you get it. If you drive it long enough, you get into the zone where you just have this tunnel vision and you just drive the map. Because it's also really good calculated, in my opinion. It's you get into the flow of the map. Transitional full speed, I would recommend another fellow American to you. He's called Ski Freak. Ski Freak he's known for transitional maps. You can imagine his full speed maps are turning more and more into deep fear. And right now he's building with another full speed driver, Don't Care, also an American, on the Trackmania 2020 version of it. And those kind of maps are like, if you can one-shot this, you're a top player. You have to be really a top player. And it makes it so difficult because the map is full of little jumps, small transitions, and then big speed checks as well. So, and really wicked flips. I know there are YouTube videos where you can look at it and you will say, no, fuck that, I will not play this. Like, we are on this level then. The transitional full speed style.
If you're up to the challenge, Kindheit's drama, that'll teach you a lot about wall rides. Like, it is a hard map, but you'll learn how to drive wall rides properly because it is so difficult to drive them. You don't need to worry about speed sliding there at all. The first thing to do is execute the wall rides and the tubes perfectly. That's like the first goal. Like, if you can do that without crashing, you're already off to a good start. Finishing that map without crashing is really hard. So even though it is a hard map, it is one I'd recommend. Firefox is the greatest full speed mapper of all time. It's undisputed. Him and Hunter have built some, basically revolutionized the way full speed maps are built.
And then you have the competitive maps, of course. The FMS maps or EFS maps for full speed major series. And all of those maps are high quality, competitive style maps. And one author of the maps I can recommend the most is probably Firefox and Hunter. Those two are really leading, I would say, or influencing how those maps look like and feel like the most. Don't think there is a single bad map from Firefox. And also it gets really technical. You don't get any easy SDs anymore on these maps. Like, you really have to work and you have to know the lines and you have to know how to exit a wall ride to get into a speed slide and gain the advantage. The level of the people that play this map, like Ox, like Switch, like Chroma, or of course Mother as well, like, those are so far ahead and above my level that it's insane.
You should take a look at competitive full speed maps. They're like another level of dang. It's actually cracked. Especially Firefox maps are way too dang. It's more difficult. It's also harder features. On Track of the Day maps, you basically have like the usual beginner stuff, like tubes, wall rides, you have loops, and then you have a bunch of SDs in between, and it drives well. But on competitive maps, you just do it like all upside down, or it's just dank. Like, it's a completely different game all of a sudden, and it's a lot faster usually. Like, you're at 700 in no time because everyone just places reactor at the start, and then like, yeah, now you go, guys. Good fucking luck.
If you really want to test how good you are at full speed, you need to play those more difficult, high-paced maps. Not just the ones with long speed drifts, but like the ones where there's a lot of stuff coming at you left and right, and you got to react to it all. Like, that's where the true skill test is, and that's like, over time, as I got better at the game, those are the kind of tracks I enjoyed more and more because it kept providing that challenge that I needed. It's like a really cool dance. Like, that's how I think of those kind of maps. I like to call them the maps that separate the men from the boys and the women from the girls.
As a new player, you start a game, you have the play button in your menu. If you go to solo campaign, let's say, you start those maps, right? I think most of the new players do that. But the game doesn't tell you anything about mechanics. You have the training button as well in that play menu. We have 25 maps, but it never explains you actually how to drift, how to take a turn, how to brake, when to brake, how to speed drift. Nothing. Okay, so actually you're completely on your own, and the only option you have is actually talk to that really great community this game has. Like, this is one of the games I've never seen such a supportive community as in this game. So take contact, make contact to people, ask them, go to YouTube actually also, and just search for Trackmania tricks, and you'll find pretty much information about those basic tricks you have to know in order to start a game, if you ask me. Because if you're just gonna start to drive and follow one random goes, it's gonna be frustrating.
Over the last few weeks, I've had the extremely fortunate opportunity to talk with many of the legends in the community, as you've heard pieces of today. And these folks very generously shared their time and wisdom to help out a newbie like me, an outsider to the community. The same can be said about more people that I wasn't able to feature in this video. Folks that make great tutorials, funny and entertaining videos, content that helps inspire folks like me to make our content better, as well as those who visited me and hung out while I was streaming, giving me advice and answering questions while I drove into walls over and over again. I wanted to say a sincere thank you to the Trackmania community for welcoming me into your world with open arms. What I learned from you all in my 6 humble weeks playing the game has made this experience an enjoyable breath of fresh air that I desperately needed in gaming. I'm hoping that this video can give back a little something to the community and those that are going to come and join in the future.
And of course, if you watch the big streamers of this game, you'll see a lot of skilled players, drivers, always hunting for WR. So it may give you the feeling that you play this game to get WRs, but actually it's not the case. And it's not about hunting to get the WR, because if that's the goal for each new players, I'd say this game would be dead, If you are new to the game, I'd say set your own goals, right? Start to play a map, finish it decently, and then you go by there and you try to improve as good as possible, but never aim to get a WR, because if you play campaign maps or Track of the Days, those times are so freaking hunted by the best of the best. You will never reach it if you're a new driver. So set up another personal goal and go from there.
We have Rondane and we have Careless.
So that's so English. It's Rondane.
Rondane.
It's the mountain.
Yeah, Rondane.
After seeing a replay of a run driven on a track called Rondane, created by the Trackmania legend Chroma, that had been featured in a track-making competition put on by Virtual, I was immediately struck both by the stunning aesthetic as well as the hypnotizing, flowing lines that its author drove, seemingly without effort. I knew almost nothing about track design, but I did know that this was unlike any track I had seen before. Wanting to dive deeper into the world of Trackmania Full Speed, I could think of no better track to start with and had to give it a try myself. Unbeknownst to me, for the next 2 days I'd be lost in an endless cycle of start, crash, reset, start, crash, reset, take a few minutes to watch the world record replay, take notes paying attention to what they were doing differently, how I could improve, crash, reset, over and over again. After over 20 hours straight, split over the course of 2 days, repeating the same 30-something second track over and over again, after resetting literally thousands of times, only 4 or 5 seconds into a run because of a single mistimed button press, completely eliminating any chance to hit a decent time, after improving my personal best dozens of times, each one by an increasingly smaller margin, and then suddenly the track maker himself, Chroma, showed up in my chat. He hung out for a while and gave me some advice and encouragement. After a few promising runs, followed by a ton of pretty tough failures, he said this. Now, I hadn't really thought about what my end goal was at the time, but as soon as he said that, I suddenly got a second wind. There was a new challenge that I had to achieve. After 5,000 reset runs and a number of failed attempts to clutch out the finish of runs that were on pace to beat my goal, on May 12th, 2022, I got this run. And what fascinates me the most is that as mediocre as my time on this track may be, I can't help but feel like my experience perfectly embodies the heart and soul of Trackmania full speed. Despite the dozens of hours of grinding, thousands of failed attempts, punctuated by a single 34.958 second success, despite all of the more experienced and skilled players above me on the leaderboard with times that I'd likely never beat, it doesn't really matter. All that matters is that little voice in the back of my head telling me that I can still go much faster. All right, boys, let's see what we can do. Thanks for watching.